Finally, it happened to me. I'm unemployed.
Hey guys, this is Tom Monda. Welcome to Unemployed, my YouTube web series where I talk to a bunch of musicians who've been influential and important to me in my life and kind of introduce you guys to them. So right now I'm talking with a jazz guitar legend, Dave Stryker. Dave was a professor of mine at Montclair State University. Amazing musician, amazing guy. Has played with so many greats. It's kind of crazy to think about. And Dave, thank you so much for joining me today, man.
Hey, Tom, how you doing, man? Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, man. It's always great to talk to you. And I know, like a lot of my audience, I have like a much different audience. So this is a good opportunity for me to expose them to someone whose music was really important to me and whose teaching was really important to me. Dave's just amazing. He just put out a new record with Bob Mintzer. It's a big band record. Do you want to talk about that record? Let people know kind of about that whole thing.
Yeah. What year was that you studied with me? It was in 59. I forget what.
I believe it was 59. Yeah.
No, when I'm serious. When was that? Because I think that was my first year teaching at Montclair State.
Yeah, I think that was 2011.
2011.
2011 BC, before Corona.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes, and it was just like 1 year, right?
Yeah. I had you right at the tail end of my.
So I didn't have enough time to like ruin your playing or anything.
Yeah.
Obviously.
No, man, you helped me so much in my time there. I was really lucky that I caught you right when you got there. Tom, you're one of my success stories in that case because I think what you've been doing with your group is really creative, and I really enjoy following what you're doing, man. And thank you, Dave.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. Man.
Yeah. So this most recent record is it's called Blue Soul, and it's with, as you mentioned, Bob Mintzer, who is just a big hero of mine. I mean,
yeah.
When I first came to New York, I moved here in about 1980, and there was a club called 7th Avenue South, and the Brecker Brothers and Jocko and all these people were playing down there, and I would hear him. And then I saw him. He played with Jocko's group, Word of Mouth. There's some incredible videos with if you check it out, Jocko Word of Mouth with an incredible group he had that was like a big band with no chords. So it was Jocko, Peter Erskine, Othello Molyneux on steel pan. That was the closest to chords. Randy Brecker and Mintzer out front. And then like a big band. It's really, I mean, that music is so great. Anyway, so I've been a fan of Bob's, and he's, like one of the heavy, coming out of Coltrane, but with his own thing.
And heavy arranger too, on top of improv.
Contemporary of Brecker. Yeah. And there's a bunch of guys that from New York that super heavyweight cast. Brecker, Bob Berg, who passed, unfortunately. Both those guys are gone now. Yeah. Bob Mintzer, Liebman, Steve Grossman, Jerry Bergonzi. There's a whole I'm probably leaving out some guys, but there's a whole post-Coltrane tradition there that's heavy. And so he's in that, and he's always had a big band, and he's been with the Yellow Jackets now for 30 years. So, I mean, whenever I think that before all this happened, whenever I thought that I was busy, I would look at Bob, who tours with the Yellow Jackets. He's the head of the jazz program at USC. He's the chief conductor of the WDR band in Cologne, Germany, and does his own gigs. So he's kind of insane guy. So I've had a group, an organ trio for a while now with Jared Gold and McClenny Hunter. And I asked Bob if he would be a guest with us for some tours and some festivals and stuff. And he did. We had a great time, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been doing this project called 8-Track, which is it was a recording technology that wasn't the greatest invention that we've ever come up with in the U.S. But it was actually the first chance back in the day when you could play a tape in your car. It was called an 8-Track. And so I had an idea to play the music from that era, which is the 70s, like soul music. And so I did like 3 records now of that. And so we would play some of those tunes, and then we would play some of my originals and some of Bob's tunes. And he, they were looking, since he's the, chief conductor in Cologne, Germany of the WDR big band, he had the idea that this would be a good fit, to bring me over.
Sure.
And I had actually visited there before, like when I was on tour with somebody, went to the studio, and it's kind of incredible. In Germany, they have 4 full-time big bands.
Probably subsidized by the government,
right?
Too, right?
As well as orchestras. And, basically everybody pays in their taxes like a certain percentage, which is usually works out about $8 a year. But because of that, that's all it takes. And they can finance, these guys are on staff. It's a staff orchestra, staff big band.
Yeah.
So in Cologne, they have the big band, the WDR big band, but they also have 2 orchestras. And they basically, what they do is projects, record them and play them on the radio or TV. And it's people's entertainment and it's their culture, and people are happy to pay for it. And so it's a super tight band, and it was a real like dream for me to Bob, arranged some of that 8-track stuff. In other words, he heard that idea. Well, this would be kind of interesting to do some of those 8-track type pop tunes that Dave has arranged. Sure. So he kind of took, my arrangements and some of the stuff I did with Jared Gold, the organ player, but man, just like totally expanded them for big bands.
Yeah, man.
It's and very, very cool.
On the tip of that, those 8-track records, I think that's like a perfect example of something that like is great for people who don't listen to a lot of jazz to get into, because I find I have like, trouble like showing my friends who aren't like specifically jazz musicians, like records, because they hear this old repertoire that's not really recognizable to them to begin with, being mutated, in new like adventurous ways. So it's so abstract. But when you hear it on something like 8-track, where you're doing repertoire that like we all know, those soul songs, we all grow up hearing them. It's not so far removed from us that when you guys take departures on that stuff, you still kind of want to come on the adventure. You're not lost. You know what I mean? And for a non-jazz musician listening, I think that's a really important thing. So anybody watching the channel right now who's not like an avid jazz listener, I would say those 8-track records are like a really great sort of foot in the door to start appreciating, that art form a little more.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I mean, it's to me, it's always, I think that's why I play music, and I think you do, and a lot of people, is that you want to communicate some positive energy out into the world. And when you hit it right on the head, if people hear a song they kind of recognize, they'll go with you. And then you can take, and you can put some hip harmony on it.
Totally.
Maybe if it's a tune like Papa Was a Rolling Stone on my last one, by the Temptations. And it's just one chord, forever. You can do some things with it as long as you have that da 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 da. Something that people latch on to. Then you can kind of treat it like almost like a standard and blow over those changes that you come up with, And I still love to play tunes too. We call it tunes in jazz, but like the standards that the tune, all the things you are, and I've met Miss Jones. These kind of tunes are great, but it's been a way to communicate to a bit, get people into the music a little bit more, because when they hear a melody they recognize, they'll go along with it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the music from that era too, just in terms of social relevance, the messages in those soul tunes that you're playing, and a lot of them are still pretty valid, especially right now with everything that's going on in the world.
Yeah, we did what's going on. Actually, was incredible.
Yeah, that's the first one I think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, there's unfortunately it's instrumental, but the tunes are meaningful in that way too. You're right. The original lyrics by Marvin Gaye, and I do tunes by Curtis Mayfield and Stevie Wonder, and so
super great records. Now, do you think that's a direction that like jazz musicians should dive into more if we want to get a wider audience to listen to the music? For me, I found a way to kind of marry my love for jazz with something, incorporate the elements that I love about jazz into kind of a different sort of platform. Do you think that sort of the more relatable repertoire is the key to getting, growing the jazz audiences more from like a lot of the jazz audiences tend to be maybe jazz players too. You know what I mean? In a lot of modern jazz audiences, I would say.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the key to sort of kind of broadening the appeal of the music, in terms of getting a repertoire that people could relate to more? Like you look at bands like the Bad Plus or Brad Meldau, guys who take a lot of really modern repertoire. Is that something that you're kind of going to go down the rabbit hole more of?
Well, first off, I have to say this is really nothing new what I'm doing, because the guys that I worked with, even when I started out playing in Omaha, Nebraska, like when I was learning how to play jazz, I remember the sax player kind of was showing me standards and stuff, and he showed me a tune like Never Can Say Goodbye, which has the same changes kind of as on Green Dolphin Street, and a tune like Call Me that had hip changes, but they were pop tunes on the radio at that time. And so whether it was at the Holiday Inn or wherever they had a gig, they would play all the things you are, and I'll Remember April, and then Call Me or something. So it's always been there. And then when I got with Jack McDuff, he would always, throw in a pop tune, like he forget what he did, maybe 100 Ways or something like that.
And Jimmy Smith was always doing that.
They all did it. And then I was with Stanley Turrentine for 10 years, and when I was in the group, he did a record of all Stevie Wonder's music. So Stanley was a guy that was really crossed over, and so this was really not anything new. The idea of playing these tunes, but the idea of when I got the idea, I was throwing in tunes like on a set and by the Carpenters or something, and I'd say that this is a song that's going to be on my next record. Dave plays the hits of the 8-track as a joke, and people would laugh.
Yeah.
Uproariously, actually, no. They would chuckle under their breath. And then people started coming up and saying, hey, when are you going to release that 8-track record? I'll buy that, And my wife also encouraged me, said, okay, you need to do this. So the idea that just having the 8-track idea was, I said, let me go ahead and do this before somebody steals my idea,
Totally, yeah.
Yeah,
it might be one of the cooler things to come out of such a doomed medium. To be honest.
By the way, my wife is in the other room, so if I didn't say that, she claims credit. And I think it is a good thing to do. I don't think it's, for instance, you mentioned the Bad Plus and Brad Meldau, people like this.
Yeah,
I think it's good to throw in a tune or two, but you don't have to do all that. Like the 8-track project, I kind of just did all that. But then when I would do a gig, I still, I wouldn't do a whole set of it. I would play a bunch of it, or and then I would play some of my tunes.
Yeah.
And maybe throw a standard in. It's a good way just to mix it up. But I agree. I love what Brad Meldau has done with some of his stuff and the Bad Plus, and some people have done Bjork tunes, and it's just a way to bring some people in that think that they hate jazz, and
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of people's assumptions about jazz who don't listen to jazz, I think, has a lot to do with that sort of not being being able to readily relate to the repertoire. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I highly recommend those 8-track records to anybody who's not familiar with Dave's music and wants to dive in. That's a real great place to start. He has so much great stuff out though. So you mentioned you grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. How did you get into jazz? What was the impetus for you, like discovering this music and kind of like, you know, so steadfastly getting into it and making it your life's journey? You know, what was it?
Well, you know, I was out in the cornfield, and I was no, just kidding. That's go with the cliche, but actually, Omaha is a big town, the next big town after Chicago, as you're heading west. But if you do get out into the western part of Nebraska, you know, you will, if you've ever made that drive, it's pretty endless flat.
Mm-hmm.
But I was started out like a lot of us, you know. I had an older sister. She had all the Beatles records and Rolling Stones 45s. So, you know, I got hooked. By the time I was 10, I was like really wanted to start taking guitar lessons. So I started out with that, and then I remember learning tunes off the radio, you know, Three Dog Night, and bought, you know, at that time, my first record was Disraeli Gears by Cream.
Oh,
which
cool.
is just still a killing record.
Yeah, that's a good place to start.
Smash hits, Jimi Hendrix. So if you really think about it, in certain ways, those are kind of jazz records in a way. They're blues influence. They're coming from, you know, black music. Eric Clapton had listened to, of course, Albert King. You know, so here's a guy from Omaha getting the music secondhand from Eric Clapton, but not realizing that in Chicago, you know, 3 hours east, these cats were playing the music. Yeah. But I got there eventually, and so I guess, you know, hearing those killing blues solos was something that got into my DNA. Then when I guess I went through my, you know, Deep Purple, and you know, you can cut this out, right? 'Cause I don't.
Yeah, it'll be censored. Don't worry.
It'll ruin my career. Everything. I mean, I'm 13, long hair, and you know, Smoke on the Water, and Black Sabbath, and the weirdest shit. So went through that stage. Then Alice Cooper. Then went into Santana and Allman Brothers, and now you've got kind of hipper.
Hipper harmonies,
rock bands that are improvising a little bit, right? Like the Allman Brothers live at the Fillmore East, you know, these long tunes. So my friends and I were jamming on these tunes, and we don't know what we're doing or anything, but you know, we just having fun. And then I went to a jam session at the Union Hall, and I had long hair and a Telecaster, I remember, and they were playing a song for my father. And I get up there and I just start ripping my rock licks over this. And one of the guys comes up to me and says, "Hey man, you can't be playing that rock shit on this, man. This is jazz." It's like, you know, meanwhile I thought I was amazing. You know, I was like, "Don't you realize I'm amazing? What are you talking about?" No, so it was next day I go to Homer's Records and I say, I really didn't know. I had never even hardly heard the word jazz. And I said, "Where's the jazz section?" He said, "Back there." So somehow I walked out of there, Tom, with Beyond the Blue Horizon, George Benson, CTI record. Yeah. And my favorite thing's Coltrane.
Jeez.
So, you know, just opened my ears up big time. I was like, what? Yeah. So, you know, luckily I went back, you know, and said, let me check out Grant Green, who was George's influence. And I could hear what Grant was doing a little easier. And Wes Montgomery, Pat Martino was a huge influence. And I know that we used to work on Pat Martino. I think you learned that Sonny solo, didn't you?
Yeah,
when you were studying with me.
Yeah, exactly.
As I recall, all 20 pages of it. But so it was. I just got hooked on jazz and loved it, man. You know, it was like, especially guys like Pat Martino, Wes. You know, just like fiery.
Totally, yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's definitely that thread between the blues rock that you started with, that you know, that energy and that feel and that fire is in there, and all those jazz guys, you know, Benson and everything.
Yeah,
For sure.
Benson
So
for sure.
yeah, so now you're coming up as a player in Omaha. When did you decide in your life that like playing guitar was going to be your thing? Like what was like was there a turning point you could sort of kind of delineate as like drawing a line in the sand in terms of, okay, now I'm Dave, the professional guitar player, you know?
I was lucky in that, I was started gigging a lot, and it would seem like, I guess I was never going to do anything else.
Hmm.
To be honest with you,
Yeah.
my parents were supportive. My father was a MD, and they didn't like say you have to go to college or anything. They just saw, because by the time I was in high school, I was working in a band we were working all the time, and the drummer's dad was a booking agent, so we're like playing in Oterbold, Iowa, prom,
Yeah, yeah.
and they want to hear "Color My World" and whatever's on the radio, and we're playing like Little Feat and the most obscure Jesse Ed Davis, whatever we were, crazy stuff, and so I always did. And then later, that same group, I had we got a gig at the Hilton in Omaha where we would play 6 nights a week for 6 weeks at a run. And the first 2 sets would be standards where, older folks would dance to Satin Doll and Girl from Ipanema and stuff. And then the last 2 sets would be top 40. And so, by the time I'm out of high school, I was working a lot. Went to a Jamie Aebersold camp down in Wichita, Kansas. And my combo teacher was Joe Henderson. So it was insane.
Wow. Amazing.
And that was a real life changer,
Yeah.
And I just, by the time that band kept going for a minute, but then I said, another great guitar player came that was from Omaha, a legendary guy named Billy Rogers came back through town, and I started to kind of hang with him and study with him a little bit. Very inspiring guy, passed away too early from drugs, but a guy that played, like Benson, super fiery,
Yeah.
but could also play funk. And so I ended up moving out to LA for a couple of years and then came to New York after that.
Nice.
So I've always played music, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Now, when you were coming up, did you ever see yourself or imagine yourself as Dave, the college professor? So
No.
that this whole new chapter of your life, right? Because you came up in a place that sounds like you came up like, how the musicians would traditionally learn this music in terms of learning it on the gig, and
Exactly.
older players kind of showing you the ropes in that sort of way, and say, oh, this is the new pup.
We got a dog here.
Oh man,
she's actually not going to the beach, but she had got spayed, so she's
yeah.
she's got this on. This is I took
the
pity on her.
the cone of shame. Yeah.
Yeah, she had the cone, and we've gone to the inner tube of shame. And she's actually being pretty good right now.
Yeah, she seems pretty mellow.
That's Sadie. So, let's see. Sorry, Tom, I lost my train of thought there.
That's okay. I was distracted by the dog too, to be honest with you. So like, what I was asking was like, did you ever imagine yourself as like Dave, the college professor?
Yeah.
Like this chapter in your life that you're kind of doing now? Because the way you learned, just to recap what I was saying before the dog made an appearance. The way you learned like traditionally how jazz was taught on the gig from guys who were master musicians, kind of showing the ropes to younger players, and to go into this world
and listening to the records. Doing your homework. Yeah, it's not a. I listened to Wes Montgomery, "Smoking at the Half Note." I listened to that song, the first song on there called "No Blues."
Yeah, sure.
Over and over, and I just could. That's how you start to get it in your ear. And Grant Green, the same thing. Pat Martino. Keep listening to that and get that feel in your it's hard to teach a feel. And so that's how I learned. And then by the time I got to go up to Harlem and audition with Jack McDuff, I knew what I was supposed to sound like, because I knew that what George Benson and Grant Green and Pat Martino had all played with him. I better sound like that, or I'm not going to last on the gig. So it was trial by fire. So yeah, I learned on the gig, and it was great. I mean, we were traveling in a and a 14-foot box fan converted,
Mm-hmm.
and traveling all over the country, really paying the dues, playing in the joints. And he wasn't afraid to tell you what he thought of your playing.
Yeah.
And
I heard he could be a tough band leader.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He was a screamer.
Yeah.
There's Ben Monda actually did the gig, if you can believe that, and he's got some hilarious stories about getting screamed at. Yeah, a lot of guys didn't last very long on that gig because it wasn't for, you certainly can't be sensitive, but it was great, blues based, shuffle, swing, and Joe Dukes was the drummer, playing tunes, and great experience. And then, when we weren't on the road, we played a steady 4-night-a-week gig up in Harlem at a place called Dude's Lounge, 147th and St. Nick, that later became St. Nick's Pub, and then burned down in the last couple of years. And we would play 4 nights a week there from 10 to 4 in the morning.
That's amazing. You're hard pressed to think of like opportunities like that where you have a gig where you could play so many hours, 4 or 5 nights a week, and just kind of do your thing and explore and get better,
Yeah, and so, that's how I learned how to play, is from on the job. And what happened then was a couple things. I was asked by Jamie Aebersold to come be an instructor. But even before that, I was starting to get people wanting to take lessons with me.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody would come in and say, hey, how do you play over on Green Dolphin Street? So I would write out a little solo, and I would give it to them, and then I'd make a copy for myself and throw it on the pile. And pretty soon I had a stack of music of this, and I turned it into a book, and I got published. And just kind of some of the ideas that I use to play through tunes, using some of the language of jazz. A lot of people teach jazz, like play this scale on this chord and this mode or whatever. And the guys said the way that I learned how to play was really not that way. It was more like playing phrases that were part of the language. And,
Yeah.
And so between that and teaching at the Aebersold workshops, and then starting to do more clinics and, publishing the book, then they offered me the job at Montclair State, and then they offered me the job a few years later at Indiana University out in Bloomington, Indiana, and I've been the last 7 years flying out there every other week and teaching, out there. And then when my good friend Vic Juris just passed, they asked me to take over at Rutgers. So it's been it's really busy, before all this hit. And now, thankfully, I'm very thankful that I do have those university positions, because as you well know, the playing thing is on hold for a second.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that's how I didn't envision it, but I'm grateful for it now. And also not just because of the employment, but also because I feel like that's a noble thing to do, is to, try to help other people get better. And, I had the great opportunity to play with some of these masters like Macduff and Turrentine, who are no longer with us. And so I want to pass it on too.
Yeah. Keeping the tradition alive. Yeah.
It turns out, and then you got guys like, Tom Monda come along, and, it makes you really rethink about it. Thought your
I've made a huge mistake. Yeah.
I remember you coming into your lesson with a fretless guitar one time, and I was like, God, that thing sounds horrible. But you actually got it. Now I see some people actually playing. I mean, I have enough trouble playing in tune with frets, so you got it, man. But yeah.
Yeah, man. So do you find that teaching a lot more, and teaching at a college level, sort of makes you examine things about your own playing, or change things about your own playing?
Yeah, that's a good question. It does, because it makes you realize things that you do that you just do naturally, but you haven't figured out like some people are great educators, but they're not necessarily good players, or as good a player as they are as a teacher, but they're as a having to codify it, and explain, well, this is what I'm doing here, has been eye-opening for me, and I still have a lot to learn in that regard. There's the cool thing about music, as you well know, never ends. There's always, it's sitting down in my basement, not right now, just waiting.
Yeah.
You pick it up and you can play it, but there's so much to learn, man.
Yeah.
All you got to do is put on a Coltrane record or something, and you'll see.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's such an expansive place with no end, and that's kind of like the thing that people who don't do music for a living sort of don't understand, that like you're kind of always on the clock because there's always something to learn. So like I know at least me, like anytime if I'm not working on music, there's almost like an element of guilt because I'm like, shit, there's so much stuff I got to work on and I could be working on right now, and just like it's this never-ending journey,
Yeah, I mean, there's always, and composing. I know you do a lot of that, and I have too. I always work better when I had a record date or a gig I had to learn somebody's music for.
Yeah, deadlines are crucial for me too.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, but now it's our deadlines are not.
Yeah,
we were joking about that earlier. When we were setting this up. Like I joked, well, I'll have to check my schedule.
Yeah,
Okay.
totally. So like now, what kind of advice can you give to the musician who's like, let's say, just graduating school right now, going out into the world to try to gig, and the entire industry is shut down indefinitely? Like, if there was another sort of like timeline where young Dave Stryker was graduating now, 2020, going out into the world, what would you do?
Well, I have two sons that are in their late 20s.
That's right, and they're sort of in the your one son's a filmmaker. He's kind of in the arts.
They're both into film. One is into got a degree from Emerson in writing for TV and film. He's in L.A., and the other one's in Austin and is involved in an editing, good editor, and that's Tom. That is a good question. Now, even before this all hit, it was a good question. If you're going to go into music, you have to love it. You have to like you and your band. I mean, you guys are out there paying serious dues, going on the road, piling into vans and doing it. I mean, it's people, it's just so that you can get on stage and play your tunes and put it out there. There's nothing like it. If you're a musician, it's such a great feeling. But if you're not 100% in, do something else, man.
Yeah.
Like go into the trade, get a trade, man.
Dude, I tell my students
I'm not kidding you, man. I mean, like a plumber, a guy that works on my roof, an electrician. These are noble pursuits, man. If you want to make a living, I mean, trying to make a living playing music is tough, and but it's on the other side, there's nothing like the feeling you get from playing with other people and creating in the moment. And so that is, even with all that's going on right now, you still, a lot of my students, they love the music enough that they want to just get as good as they can and give it a shot.
Yeah.
But as far as advice on that, I think, get with your friends, get a band together, write tunes, put your vision out there, exactly what you're doing. That's the best advice I could give. You have to be proactive. You have to, you can't just like sit at home. You gotta meet people and try to make a scene. If there's not a scene, you got to make a scene.
Yeah,
I think you guys are doing that,
Well, we're trying our best, man. I mean, it's along the same wavelength as something I tell my students is like, if you really want to do music, don't give yourself a plan B, because music is so hard. If you have something you could fall back on, you might just fall back on it. You know what I mean? And
I mean, if you go to college and you can always teach, but the thing is if that's something you want to do, that's cool.
Yeah,
And
sure.
you could teach that, or you could teach something else. And I think it's a very noble thing to teach.
Totally.
Maybe you don't end up teaching what you studied. There's no
Yeah.
rules. Maybe you end up, teaching English or teaching history or something that, I feel that teaching is something that, you could do. But if, for music, you have to love it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
got you just gotta, it's gotta be, there's not any question about it. This is what I'm going to do.
And especially touring too, because maybe the first tour you go on it could be kind of a rude awakening for some people, because it's a lot less glamorous than you might think it would be, and it's a lot of hurry up and wait, and it's a lot of not sleeping, and it's a lot of all these things that to stress your point, you have to love it. You really
Yeah,
have to love it. So
for
like,
sure.
now, Dave, you've played with some incredible players, and I just want to ask you for some maybe some top secret Dave Stryker advice, or maybe some good nuggets of knowledge that you got from some of these legends that you played with. Does anything like stand out in your mind as something that really affected you? Something that maybe one of these guys said to you, or something that you thought about after you played a gig, or something like that?
Well, let's see. When I was with Jack, I remember he, to me, there's three things in music: sound, time, harmony.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that has to be together is the sound that you're putting out there. I'm talking about people listening to you.
Yeah.
They don't know anything about music or scales or anything. They hear your sound, then they hear your rhythm, and then they hear, whatever harmony you're doing. But so like the first gig with Macduff, I remember we traveled all the way. We left. It was like in February, and we had a gig in Marla's Memory Lane in L.A. So we were driving to L.A. and we did a couple gigs on the East Coast, and then of course in Philly or somewhere the truck broke down.
Mm-hmm.
And so we sat in a motel, all of us, while the truck got fixed. And then we had to drive straight from Philly to LA and didn't stop.
That's like 3 days maybe nonstop,
My
right?
first gig, yeah. And we got there. The gig started at 9:00 on Friday night, and we got there at 10. And everybody's there in like dressed up, black.
Yeah.
Marla, and we roll in with the Leslie. And Macduff takes my little polytone amp and puts it on his Leslie speaker,
Mm-hmm.
this close to his head. And I'm already a little nervous because, like I said earlier, you've got Grant Green, Pat Martino, George Benson have all played with him. And this is the first time he's heard me on the...
That's like the best. For those who don't know, that's like the legends of this like organ trio kind of playing style. Like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Dave is following in those guys' shoes and on the same gig. Yeah.
When I got in the band, he finally got a good guitar player.
He shaped up.
So I don't know if you've ever like put your head right next to this far away from an amp,
Yeah.
Polytone amp. But the next day, Macduff says that we're driving, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting in the front seat. I'm just waiting because I know it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Stryker, what kind of sound is that you're getting on that guitar? Sounds like T-Bone Walker. Maybe that's what you like. I don't know. So that's his way of saying, get your sound together, right?
Yeah.
So, that's just one thing that popped out of, like little nuggets, things like that you hear from, one time I'm up playing at that dude's lounge. I look out in the audience, and 10 feet away, George Benson is sitting right there. And I'm playing an L5 through that same polytone, and I just thought to myself, I said, if I get through this night, I'll be good the rest of my life, because no one's gonna ever, like, to me, he's the heavyweight champ. There's no one,
Yeah.
except for Pat Martino, and I
Mm-hmm.
had that similar experience in Philly one night. But
Mm-hmm.
And George got up and sat in and took my guitar and didn't turn around and adjust a knob, didn't touch anything on the guitar, just started playing, and guess what? Sounded just like George Benson. It's like, oh, it's in the fingers.
Yeah.
So, these are, getting a good sound, having good rhythm. The way you get good rhythm is listening. You have to, like nowadays, I tell my, people that ask or students, I say, listen to a few things a lot instead of a lot of things a little. If you're trying to learn how to play, take one record, take a Grant Green or a Wes Montgomery record and just listen to that. Nowadays, there's so much info out there, you can listen to soup to nuts, and, it's fun to do that. And, maybe you're thinking, well, I'm well-rounded, but if you really want to learn this music, you have to zone out and zone in on, like you did that on that Pat Martino solo. You listened to it all summer or whatever, I forget, but, you listen to it over and over and over and over, and then it just sinks in, and then you figure it out on the guitar, and then, some of that rubs off into your playing, and, that's how we do it. So these kind of things are things that I learned from them. And Stanley, when I was with Stanley, he didn't say that much. He kind of, if you got the gig with him, he expected you to deal. In other words, like if you're both of those guys, you're talking about masters. When they get done playing your solo and you're the next guy going to take a solo, you better be dealing, and you better be like, have a feel and have a good sound and have good rhythm and ideas and know how to build your solo from here to there, not just be up there noodling around, or you're not gonna, it's gonna sound like total, not gonna work. So that's the kind of stuff you kind of learn, that just, to hang,
Sure.
to be able to hang.
And maybe it's observation from the outside with those masters. You talk about, how it's like you're staring down the barrel of a loaded gun if you have a solo after one of those guys. But like, something that I feel like a lot, these guys who are incredible jazz improvisers, they sort of, they not only think of the micro of their solo, but also the macro of like how their solo like lies in terms of the entire piece, in terms of the energy level of the entire piece. And they're able to like really like, just get the energy in just the right place to where like it also seems like a cohesive whole, part of the piece, and not just like a moment. You get what I'm saying?
Sure. Well, the other thing is you mentioned, staring down the barrel of a gun. That's one way of looking at it. But once you get past that, then you can be inspired by what just happened before you and what's going to happen after you, and say, man, this is as good as it's going to get, man. Like, and make yourself, that makes you play even better, because you're like, my God, look who I'm playing with. Look, what did I just hear? That felt so good. Yeah, but of course, like Stanley was very popular. He had his hits. People would come to hear him play. At
like
all these
Sugar
jazz.
and all that.
Yeah, Sugar was one of them, but he had other ones too. And he would play, a certain set. He might mix things up a little bit, but certain tunes got played in a certain way. Certain dynamics and arcs would occur in these songs, and putting on a show, right? I mean, in a way, entertaining people, making people have a good time, making people tap their foot and move their head because it feels so good. These are things that that you learn sometimes, not from people saying stuff, but just observing. And so I learned that on the bandstand too,
And that's an observation from seeing you play, a lot of times. The way you lead your band and kind of the banter, you're not afraid to be funny, which is nice in that sort of setting. You know what I mean? Where it's like jazz can sometimes be very, very serious. And but a lot of these, I look at, like, I was watching old videos of Eddie Harris playing, right? And like that guy was an entertainer. He's making people laugh. He's making people like swing and groove.
Yeah, he did a comedy record.
Yeah, and it's like it's the whole thing of like there's so much personality. A lot of and sometimes when that's not there, I miss it as an audience member. Yeah. And
well, people go out to hear music. They want to have a good time. It's but you don't have to. You can do both. That's what you kind of. Me. I mean, I I make jokes, and so that happens on stage too sometimes. But you know, that's not always, they're not always funny, but what the hell. It's just the way, it's just, you know, this is the way I am. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, it's, you know, those are the kind of lessons that I'm grateful I got to learn from playing with guys like that. And you learn also things you don't want to do, you know, things that were a drag. Say, well, when I have my own band, I'm not going to ever make people feel that way again, you know.
Yeah.
As far as, you know, when it comes to business things, money, itineraries, you know,
Totally. I mean, that's like,
yeah,
that's so clutch, man. I lead a band and I get that. And that was not something that I learned in music school. That's something you have to learn. Like just how to treating people right, you know, treating people like they deserve, you know, paying everybody equally, you know, doing all these things, you know, that are so important for morale, you know, learning how to book an itinerary for a tour, learning all these things, you know,
yeah,
that's kind of just a learn by doing thing that, yeah, for sure. Unless you're on the road doing it,
yeah.
you really don't get the opportunity to. So before we wrap things up, I just wanted to ask you, so you're kind of like, you know, we're all in quarantine right now. What have you been working on musically, on your own right now, on your own time? What are you shedding? What are you working on? What are you writing? You know, what are your plans moving forward? What are you cooking
Well,
up?
I have this record that we talked about at the beginning, Blue Soul, that came
Hmm.
out. So I've been trying to push that as much as I can. I decided either I'm going to wait for a year to put it out, or I'm going to put it out like I planned on it. And I figured, you know, things are starting to open up a little bit now.
Hmm.
But you know, when a couple months ago, I was just like, look, people need to hear some good music. I'll just put it out there.
Yeah.
Um, and see what happens. And so, you know, been doing that. I've been putting about one record out a year for a long time, and I started my own label 10 years ago, and so that keeps me busy doing the business things and trying to, you know, to
Yeah.
do social media and all that. And uh, but also I have an online teaching. I finished up online at the three universities that I've mentioned that I teach at, and with Zoom but I've also had an online teaching school at artistworks.com. That is a nice platform that people study with me on there. So that, you know, once a week I would answer my video exchanges with them. People send in a little video of them playing, studying one of my lessons, or you know, like playing over a certain tune, some ideas, and then they'll send it in. And then once a week I answer each video. And so I made myself start putting, you know, just working on solo tunes, you know, because since there's nobody to play with,
Hmm.
might as well work on our solo guitar playing.
I've
So,
been waiting for you to put out like a solo guitar record, man.
well, you know,
I remember you
uh,
used to do this beautiful solo version of Alfie that was just so nice, and I wish I could have that to listen to.
yeah,
Uh, but
thanks. Well, that's the thing, you know, some of these tunes are so great, and it's fun to, it's been fun to just learn, you know, work on new tunes that I always wanted to learn. For heaven's sake, I did that one recently. It's a tune I love, but I never learned, you know. So,
yeah.
so what's just making myself, and I've been putting. I also bought a guitar, this Gibson 125, 1956. That's really sweet.
Nice.
And
Where'd you cop that from?
I just a friend of a friend was selling it, and the price was very right. And I mean, because as a guitar player, I don't know about you, but I have plenty of guitars
Yeah.
and amps and stuff. So so I kind of call that my quarantine guitar. So I basically once a week I've put just up on social media, put up a song, you know, just for the kicks, and you know, uh, that's key. You know, I'm working on some monk music, and um, you know, like we talked about, there's always stuff to work on. It's just if motivating yourself to do it. I've also worked on things that I know that I need to work on as far as my teaching and as far as reading. You know, I've been working on that because it seems like that's always something that can use some work.
Yeah, that's a muscle. If I don't work, it leaves me very quick. I have to always, like,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. So as a, you know, I want my students to be able to do that. So I need to stay on top of it.
Yeah, before everything shut down, I was doing the Tina Turner musical on Broadway,
Oh,
and
really? Wow.
I had, I hadn't done like really too many reading gigs. Like most of the gigs I do, apart from my band, I do a regular gig with this jazz singer, and it's just tunes that we know. I haven't really done any heavy reading in a while, so that was like, it was good to sort of get back into that kind of zone.
Cool.
But yeah, that is something that I find too, that I have to like stay on top of the reading, otherwise like
Yeah, I mean,
it falls right out of my head.
It's a good skill to have. You don't have to have it, but it's nice to at least work on it.
Yeah.
So
Dave,
go ahead.
Where's the best place for people to support you and support your music? Where should I link people to? I'm going to throw some links in this video.
I have a Bandcamp link that you can get my music from my label on, including my new one, Blue Soul.
Awesome.
And that's just Dave Stryker, Stryker.bandcamp.com.
Awesome.
That's a nice platform. A lot of my previous records I wasn't putting out on Spotify, but I've decided to, now that they've already been out for a while, I'm putting everything up on Spotify. So in the next month or so, there should be more stuff of mine on my Spotify channel.
Is the steeplechase stuff up there? Like
Yeah, there is. There's the steeplechase stuff is on Spotify.
Cool.
And also I have a website. My name, DaveStryker.com. You can
Cool.
check me out there, and I put everything on there. My gigs when they come back, they'll be on.
Yeah,
there.
whenever that may be.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, I want to thank you so much for your time, man, and also thank you so much for stuff you taught me over the years and all the great music. And it's been a pleasure chatting with you. And I hope when this whole thing's over, I could see you play live again.
Right on, and works both ways. I'm super proud of you, and look forward to see what you coming up with in the next few years, man. It's gonna be great.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it, man.
All right, Tom.
Yeah, man. Be
All
safe,
the
buddy.
best. Take care. Everybody be safe.